Hi everyone, I welcome you all to another session on econometrics. What we will be doing today is a chapter on heteroscedasticity. Now, in our classical linear assumptions, what we had assumed was that the error terms were homoscedastic. What do we mean by homoscedasticity? We mean that along each independent variable x, the error term, the variance of the error term, and thereby the variance of each y was constant. So we were assuming that the error terms, and when we say the error terms, we basically mean yi's. So all of them are constant along each xi. However, this is again a classical assumption, and in data, especially in case of, we will see that especially in case of cross-sectional data, this assumption does not hold true. In cross-sectional data, the problem of heteroscedasticity is assumed to be a rule rather than an exception. Whereas when you have a time series data, then in that case, the problem of heteroscedasticity is not that amplified. However, we do have cases of heteroscedasticity in the case of time series data, and that is treated by something called as Garch models, Arch and Garch models. So let's that Arch and Garch is not there in their syllabus. It comes under advanced econometrics. But let's start our analysis of heteroscedasticity. And the way that we are going to proceed with this chapter is that we will understand the nature of heteroscedasticity. As I told you in the previous chapter of multicollinearity, that when we are studying violations, our kind of approach will be similar in both the chapters. Then what are the kind of consequences of heteroscedasticity? Then we will see detection. How do we detect the heteroscedasticity in data? And then the remedies. This is going to be our architecture for this this particular chapter. Let's move forward. As I told you that the classical linear assumption is that of homoscedasticity, whereas what we are undertaking, what we are dealing with this in this chapter is the case of heteroscedasticity, where you have unequal or non-constant variance. And the way to move forward is this. Again, the four parts of the chapter. Let's understand the nature of heteroscedasticity. Now, as I told you, in case of cross-sectional data, let's first recall what is cross-sectional data. You have three kinds of data. You have a cross-sectional data, then you have a time series data, and then you have a panel data, which is a combination of. Now, a cross-sectional data is whereby you are taking a pure cross-sectional data. When I say a pure cross-sectional data is whereby you're taking the data for a particular variable at one particular point of time. For example, if you have take the example of these savings. So savings, you're trying to see the savings of people across different income groups. So these different income groups are basically different cross sections. These are rich income groups. These are poor income groups. These income groups are on an ascending orientation. So this kind of data, when you have different cross sections of your independent variables, that is called as a cross-sectional data. In case of a time series data, what you do is the same person or the same, suppose if you want to see that over the time, how has the consumption or the savings of a particular group of income group has been doing. So suppose you take this particular group X2, which represents an income bracket, and this income bracket, if you see across time, say 1991, then 2001, then 2011, then 2021, that is called as a time series data. And if you combine these two kinds of data, then that is called a panel data. Now, what we are saying is that in case of cross-sectional data, the problem of heteroscedasticity will definitely be there as a rule rather than as an exception. Now, why will that be the case? Because when you have varied kind of individuals or varied kind of classes, the kind of data that you get, and the kind of deviation that you get in data will be quite different. For example, let us take this case. While our assumption in the initial chapter was of homoscedasticity, whereby in different income groups, you were saying that the savings, although the savings were increasing, the spread of the savings was constant. Whereas that is not the case in reality. A person from a richer class, say this one, will have a higher disposable income. If he has a higher disposable income, then he can afford to save less or he can afford to save more. That is according to what kind of a thrift personality you are. Whereas in case of a lower income group, he does not has that option. He does not have that option. So thereby the variance will be smaller, and that is why in a cross-sectional data you will definitely find that the variance will be changing. Now this is one kind of an example. This can also be of a case whereby your variance might be very huge here and then it could keep on decreasing. This could also happen. Suppose you're talking about errors that you make in typing. The first day when you come, your speed of typing, this is the speed of typing and these are the errors that you make. So this is kind of a typing example. So you start typing on your laptop, your speed is low, and when your speed is also low and you initially starting to learn the typing, then your errors are also huge. But with time your speed will also increase, and what will happen is your errors will also go down. You will keep on learning. So whenever you have that learning kind of an example and the learning curve is kind of decreasing, in that case your variance will keep on decreasing. So I just wanted to clarify that this is what students do is students assume that the variance will only increase. The variance can actually go down as well. But this is also a case of homoscedasticity, also heteroscedasticity. Both are the cases of heteroscedasticity. Heteroscedasticity is written like this. In the initial chapter that we had assumed that expectation of ui square is sigma square. This was the assumption of homoscedasticity, whereas in this case you see that at each level the variance is in each level your variance is changing. This has a higher variance, n has a higher variance as compared to this. As I told you that cross-sectional data will have more kind of heteroscedasticity in it rather than a time series data. The time series data can also have a case of heteroscedasticity. The reason is of scale effect. That the scale effect is that, for example, you have different sizes of firm. In this case, you have different sizes of income. So because of that scale effect, the kind of variation that you might have in general will increase or decrease. So in those cases, therefore, because of the scale effect, the cross-sectional data is much more susceptible towards heteroscedasticity as compared to time series data. This is another example. Now, what is this example? This is an example of commission rates being charged by New York Stock Exchange between 1975 to 1978. Now, what are these? What are these X1, X2, X3 and X4? These are basically different types of groups buying different types of shares. So a person who is buying between 0 to 99 shares, he is charged a different commission rate. A person who is buying 200 to 300 shares is being charged a different commission rate, and a person who is buying from 1000 to 10,000 shares from New York Stock Exchange is charged a different commission rate, and anyone who is buying more than 10,000 shares is charged a different. So basically these are groups of players in the market. These are very small players, these are small players, these are medium players, and these are the large sharks, large players, the HNIs, high net worth individuals, or basically pension funds, something like that. So these are huge institutional bodies which are buying huge amount of shares. So a person like me or you would be standing in between this. So what we see in the analysis of the data is that there is huge variance. If you see the variance, the the average amount, the average cent per share charge is from 59 cents per share to 40 cents per share during this period. Whereas in this case, of if it's a small player, then in that case this is the range. If you keep seeing, the range keeps on decreasing, and in this case 15 to 7. So what you see is that the variance of commission charge from different kinds of players is different. From very small players, the amount of, not only the amount of commission charge is huge, the variance is also huge. Whereas when it comes to very big players, the commission is small and the variance is also very small, because you can assume because of something called economies of scale. Because these are very large players, if you don't give them a very good deal, they can go to another commission, or they can go to another stock exchange. So that is why, because of the interaction of, again, demand and supply, as well as the monopolistic kind of market prevalence, you can have different kinds of players being charged different kinds of commissions. As I told you, the variance for the very small average buyers is huge as compared to the variance of huge buyers, and the reason being economies of scale. And what brings the economies of scale is that small institutional investors will not have the bargaining clout, will not be able to bargain with the stock exchange, whereas the big institutional players like pension funds may be able to do that. Now, although this was an example of panel data, let's see an example of pure cross-sectional data, which is given for a particular point of time. Now, this is a data for 523 workers. Now, these workers are classified according to different education groups. I mean, in the sense that different years of schooling and the experience that they have. So this is how the workers have been divided, and they will have different wages. So basically your wage becomes your dependent variable, and you are trying to analyze that how wages are being related to education and experience. Of course, you would expect, if this is your regression, you would expect your beta 2 and beta 3 to be positive. And when you run this regression through the normal OLS method, you find that both, if you see the t statistic, both of them are quite significant and your p values are quite small, basically suggesting that both beta 2 and beta 3 are quite significant, and they are able to explain the changes in the variation in wage rates. However, our problem comes when this is an analysis. This analysis that you have done is on the basis of assuming that you have homoscedasticity. Now, that may not be the case. But how would you know a priori that you have a heteroscedastic data? So you have no means to do that. So always remember, what we initially do is run a normal OLS regression, and after the OLS regression we come to different kinds of analysis to check whether our assumption is true or not. So let's move forward. So what we do is we kind of see the residual data. So what we can do is we can have a resi plot, whereas whereby we can in your econometric softwares, eViews or whether you use Stata or Python, you have something called a resi plot, residual plot. Now a residual plot can be against each particular xi or against yi as well. So what you have to do is, on your x-axis you have the residue, on your y-axis you have your residuals, and on your x-axis you can have your independent variable, each independent variable. One by one you have to see the independent variables, or you can have yi as well, yi hat as well. And you try to, and this is usually your residual square. So what you do is you try to see that if this plot is a constant plot, or is it increasing, or is it decreasing. That is an indicator. This resi plot is an indicator of you finding out whether there is evidence of heteroscedasticity in your data or not. Let's go into the detail for that. Now, what we do is we do not have the actual residuals. We do not have this in data. What we have is an approximation of this, which is through EI square. So This is the approximation that you have, and on the basis of this approximation you try to see. So what we have done here is, this is your sum. So what you have done is, you have put across your squared residuals. These are your residuals, and you have plotted them along your x2, which is education. And can you see the errors are increasing? There is a pattern in the errors, whereas even in your experience you can see that initially there are a lot of variance. This analysis will show you that your data is suffering from heteroscedasticity. This is one evidence. So always remember this plot called Resi plot. What is going to be the consequences of heteroscedasticity? A, your OLS estimators are still going to be linear. That has no effect on heteroscedasticity, has no effect on linearity. They're still going to be unbiased. Why it's going to be unbiased? Because this is a repeated sampling property. Remember in the last class also I told you this is a repeated sampling property, and unbiasedness has nothing to do with your heteroscedasticity. However, what you need to prove, as well as this proof is given in my class notes, you have to go through my class notes and you will find this proof, that in case of heteroscedasticity, your variance of parameters is no longer blue. They are linear, they are unbiased, but they are not best. They will not give you the minimum variance, and that is a huge loss that you have in case of heteroscedastic data. Therefore, what you need to do is, you need to again transform the data. Remember in the previous class I told you that in whatever violations that you have, the best solution is to transform the data. So we will see how to transform this data to convert a heteroscedastic data into a homoscedastic data. Then, so that bias, you will have a biasness in your variances. Let's just have a look at why would you have biasness in your variances. Remember the variance of beta 2 hat or B2, it was summation square upon xi square. But remember, this is no longer constant, and because this is no longer constant, this formula will actually change, and you will find out that this will be coming out with some I, and this will also be, this actually variance of B2 will be summation xi square sigma I square upon summation xi square whole square. This will be the variance. Please prove this. I've given you the result, but you need to prove this. This is also, don't initially jump on my class notes, but try to prove this, and then you can see my class notes for that. Then, apart from that, the variance that you have, the goodness of it, so that is also not an unbiased estimate, because this is, remember, this is being estimated by n minus k. This is also not going to be true because of the fact that this is also changing. Apart from the fact, because this entire thing is changing, that's why the entire variance of B2, B3 and all parameters will also change. And because this changes, therefore the confidence interval, remember your confidence interval is also dependent on sigma. So your confidence interval, your standard errors, your t values, all of that goes into a limbo because of the fact that you have heteroscedastic data. So your usual hypothesis testing is not reliable because of the fact, and it will lead to misleading conclusions because of the problem of heteroscedasticity. So you need to definitely treat this problem. It is not something like multicollinearity, if it's to a degree of which you can probably have. So this is a very serious problem, and this problem needs to be resolved, especially in case of cross-sectional data. Let's see this case. Why can't we have the normal estimates? Why can't we have the normal OLS method? See, in case of normal OLS method, what you are doing is this is your yi and this is your x. So these errors, if you can see, you have different variances along the line. And what homoscedasticity does is that it gives each of these UIs same weight. That is what you do. If you see this, in this case, each of your error terms receive the same weight, whether it comes from large variance or small variance. So whether this is coming from this or from this, each EI is getting the same weight. Whereas if you want to correctly predict this particular line, what you need to do is give more weightage to this. Why? Because the variance here is small, whereas here the variance is huge, and because the variance is huge, you need to give lesser weight. You cannot, because the variance is huge, this SRF can go this way or that way, whereas in this case the variance is small, the SRF cannot move much. So essentially, because the variance is huge in this case, you need to give lesser weight in OLS to that. That is why what we do is we divide, instead of taking the normal OLS, the ordinary least square, with same amount of weight given to each EI, what we have is a weighted average. So what essentially are we doing? When we are going to run OLS, we are going to give more weight to this, and we are going to give less weight to this. The weight will reduce here. So the weights will be kind of proportional to the variance that you have. If you have a higher variance, then the weight of that observation will be small. If you have lower variance, then the weight of that observation will be large. And we will essentially get what is called as weighted least squares. So instead of ordinary least squares, when each of your EI is given a different weight while calculating the parameters, that is called as a weighted least square method, which we will discuss later. Now, let us see the detection of heteroscedasticity. How do we detect it? Now, our problem is that when we start our analysis, we cannot assume that this is a heteroscedastic data. So because your summation I is only known when you have the entire population, what you actually have is one xi. You have xi, you have your different x's, and along different x, you have one value of yi. This is what you have in your sample. Because sampling is a very, very difficult and very expensive exercise, what you have is at different incomes, you have one observation rather than having a population or having multiple observations. So based on that one observation at each xi, what can you tell about heteroscedasticity? So that is a problem here. So you're essentially caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, because A, you have very small data, you might suspect heteroscedasticity, and if you have heteroscedasticity, then your entire OLS estimates are gone for a toss, and if you don't treat that, then again it's a problem. So that is the major problem of heteroscedastic. So to make sure whether your data has heteroscedasticity or not, we run some diagnostic tests. So what we essentially do is, as I told you, first of all, what you need to do is run the normal OLS. Run as if you have no problem. So we be in an imaginary world that there is no that classical linear regression world, that there is no heteroscedastic problem. I'm running the data as given, and this is the purest form of data, and it has no problem. After you run that data, then comes your diagnostics. That is there a problem with the error terms? So you kind of reverse engineering your way into heteroscedasticity. So what you do is, the first way is examination of residuals. So that is what I told you is called a residual plot or a resi plot. So you have squared errors, squared of your error terms, and then you plot them against each xi. So if you have multiple if you have multiple x's, if you have multiple independent variables, you will have to plot it against x2, you will have to plot it against x3, and then kind of see a pattern. And that pattern could be something like this. So if against a particular x there is no kind of pattern here, so this is an example of a Resi plot. So your errors are being mapped against your independent variable, and if you find there is no kind of pattern discernible, then you have homoscedastic data. You do not have a problem heteroscedasticity. Whereas in all these cases, can you see that the errors are increasing in either in linear way or in non-linear way, or in exponential way, or in quadratic way? So you might have different kinds of relationships between the error and your explanatory variable, which can be seen through a Resi plot, and that Resi plot will give you an intuition into what kind of relationship it might have. Always remember to do this when you're doing practical data science or practical econometrics, because this is one of the most important steps in your exploratory data analysis. There's something called EDA. In corporate world, you will find this terminology quite often, but just to give you an analysis of what EDA is. In exploratory data analysis, you kind of explore your entire data set. You kind of see what are your residuals like, what are your independent variables like, what are the distribution of your independent variables, are there classes, are different classes. So if you kind of explore your data, that is called an exploratory data analysis, and this is one of the parts where you explore the relationship between the error term and each of the individual independent variables. Now, you can have different kinds of relationships. All of these B, C, D, E are examples of heteroscedasticity, whereas example A is an example of homoscedasticity. Suppose you have multiple xi's, so this will be a very tedious task to plot each of your error squares against each particular. Suppose you have 10 explanatory variables, you have to draw 10 different plots. Then instead of that, what you can do is you can plot your EI square against your YI hat. Why you can do this? Because YI hat is nothing but a linear combination of xi's. So whatever is happening in the xi's will definitely be shown in yi's as well. So instead of plotting EI's against each variable xi, you can plot them against YI hat, because again that is the estimated mean value of y, and YI hat is a linear combination of xi's, and that will also give you a similar result. So you can replace it with YI hats as well, and on one go you can find that relationship. See here, your errors being regressed against your dependent variable, your wages, and you can see that the errors have a pattern, different kind of a pattern. It is not a constant pattern. So this again shows that there is evidence of heteroscedasticity in the data. So that is one step. However, keep in mind that if there are outliers in the data, if there are outliers in the data, then it will lead to heteroscedasticity. Suppose you have a very small sample, and in one of the cases your wage rate is extremely high. In that case, that data point will be here. The error will be quite huge, and that outlier, this outlier will lead to the conclusion that you have heteroscedasticity in data. So your your outliers definitely affect heteroscedasticity. This is one of the questions that is also asked in your MCQs or in your objective exam in your entrances. Then the second and one of the most famous tests is POC test. Now, whatever we have understood in diagrammatical manner, in case of the test, in case of the Resi plot, is being practically done graphically, econometrically in POC test. So that graphical test is just formalized in the POC test. What you do is you regress your summation I square, which is your variance, of yi against your log of variance of yi against xi's. So you want to find out that relationship, whether there is, and remember this is again the interpretation of beta 2 is in the sense of elasticity here, that if your xi is changed by 1%, then by how much percentage is there variance in your yi's. And this is the kind of regression that you will run. However, please make sure that please identify that you will not have yi square. So instead of yi square, what you will have is ei square. You will be running this regression rather than this regression. Now, what does this mean? This means is that you're trying to find out between the variance of in your errors and your xi's. And if you run this regression, what will be your null? Your null will be b2 is equal to 0. This will be your null hypothesis. And what does b2 is equal to 0 mean? b2 is equal to 0 mean that there is no, this cannot, log x cannot explain the variance in this, which essentially means that this is homoscedastic. So remember, in case of your test that you are going to do, your null hypothesis is going to be homoscedasticity or not heteroscedasticity, whereas your alternative hypothesis will be heteroscedasticity. So if you are able to reject your null, that means if your p-value is extremely small, then you will say that my data suffers from heteroscedasticity. If you are not able to reject your null, then you will say that my data is homoscedastic. Please remember this interpretation, because there is a lot of confusion among students that they assume that the null hypothesis is basically telling you about heteroscedasticity rather than homoscedasticity. So please identify these two things. Then what are the steps? So to run a POC test, what you do is you run the original regression as it is. Then what you do is you find the errors. Every regression analysis will give you errors. See, every regression analysis will give you the error terms, the squared error, standard error of regression. This is something, errors will always be given to you. So what you do is that you need to find out the residuals, and then what you need to do is so that was not residuals, that was the standard error of the regression. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to find out the residuals. You need to square them up, and almost all programs that you have has that option of squared error terms. Now what you need to do is you need to regress these errors, your squared error terms, against one explanatory variable, against each explanatory variable one by one. So you need to do that one by one against each xi, or if you have multiple x's, so what you can do is you can run your error terms directly against yi hat, because the elements of each xi will definitely be absorbed by yi hat. As I told you, beta 2 not is equal to 0 basically means no heteroscedasticity, which essentially is homoscedasticity. And if there is a significant relationship, then no heteroscedasticity can be rejected. That means there is heteroscedasticity in the data. Again, the choice that we have taken here is for convenience. The choice can depend on different kinds of functional forms, and that functional form you can see through ResiPlot. What kind of functional form? And if you see here, can you see what we have done? We have dependent variable as sum of squares of errors, and that is being regressed on your wages. And when we do that, can you see that your p is extremely small? This p is extremely small. That means your p is small. That means you will be able to reject your null. And if you are rejecting your null, what do we mean? We mean that your data suffers from heteroscedasticity. So this is what we do. Then the next test is the Gleiser test. Now in Gleiser test, it is somewhat similar to POC test. Instead in POC test, what we do is we use summation. We use log of summation. See, if you see, you will have log of ei square. So instead of instead of log of EI square, what Gleiser test does is it takes EI absolute values. EI absolute values. And then EI absolute values are then regressed on different functional forms of your explanatory variable. And in each of these, your null hypothesis is homoscedasticity. So these two tests are pretty similar to each other. Instead of taking the squared values, what Gleiser test does is takes the absolute values, the modulus values. However, and if you run this again, the regression with on education, so what you have done is you've taken the absolute values of errors and then regressed on your education, one of the explanatory variable. This was this form. Then you are taken the square root form, and then you are taken the inverse form. In all of these cases, if you see that your p value, your t values are pretty large, which essentially shows that you have heteroscedasticity in your data. However, one of the problems here is when you're trying to imagine variance, always your variance is in terms of square terms. So that is why whenever you have the element of the spirit of variance, you rely more on squared residuals, and that is where your White test and Grush-Pagan test, this is something that you will do in your masters, or if you're interested, you can go through the advanced book of Gujarati or Christopher Dougherty to go through this Grush-Pagan test. And that is why these tests, because all of these tests take squared values of the error terms, these are much more preferable to Gleiser test. Then one of the most important tests which is often used is your White's general heteroscedastic test. Why it's called White's general heteroscedasticity test is because it will take all explanatory variables and all kinds of relationships, all kinds of powers, all kinds of cross products to find out whether there exists a relationship between the squared error terms and your explanatory variables. So it is something like what we did in multicollinearity, where you run auxiliary regression. So first you run your normal regression, you find out the error terms from here, EI, you square that, and then you regress all of your variables, your each independent variable, the squared of these independent variables, the cross product. If you want to add cubes, you can do that. Whatever form that you want to do, you can use additional powers of the original variable can be added, and you will have a subsequent residual term of the auxiliary regression, and you run this regression, and you will obtain an R square from this regression, regression. And the null hypothesis is that all these coefficients are zero. If you are assuming homoscedasticity, you are saying that none of these parameters, A1 is equal to A2 is equal to A3 is equal to A4 is equal to A5 is equal to A6, are all simultaneously equal to zero. The joint hypothesis that you will take. So that will be your null hypothesis. Now, what White has shown is that the R square that you get from this auxiliary regression into the number of variables that you have, number of samples, the sample size that you have, will have a chi-square distribution with k-1 degrees of freedom. This is what White test is. So all you need to do is multiply your whatever is your sample size into the R square of your auxiliary regression, and then check that for k-1. Now, what is this k? This k is the number of explanatory variables in the auxiliary regression. Remember, this is in the auxiliary regression. In this, please don't confuse it with this. This is the number of terms in, because in this case your k is equal to 3, whereas in this case your k is equal to 7, and 7 minus 6 is your 5. 7 minus 1 is equal to 6. This. So this is one. These are your 6 variables. So sorry, this will be 6 minus 1 is equal to 5. So k in this k minus 1 will be equal to 5. The degrees of freedom in this case will be 5. and what you will do is you will just, so this is the analysis that we have. The observation into R square, you get this value, and this value is now being checked at 5 degrees of freedom in the chi-square test, and you get this particular value. And if you check, this value is less than 5%, and because it's less than 5%, at 5% level of significance, you can say that my data is heteroscedastic, because null hypothesis is homoscedasticity. So this is how you run this test. And the last test that I wanted to deal is that of Goldfeld quant test. Now, in case of Goldfeld quant test, what you do is, these are my class notes, just go through my class notes as well. So what you do is, now this is a very important test, because this test assumes that your heteroscedastic, under this test, the heteroscedastic variance is positively related to one of the explanatory variables. You are assuming this. This is the assumption under Goldfeld quant test. So your summation, your sigma I square is sigma square xi. This is the assumption of your Goldfeld quant test. So basically, what you are saying is, that your error terms will keep on increasing. Your error terms will keep on increasing as your xi increases, or your variance of your error terms will keep on increasing. So this is what it says. The variance is increasing according to each xi. However, you can also prove through the same case, you can also prove the case where the variance is decreasing. This can also be proved. But what you need to understand is that the Goldfeld quant test assumes that there is a monotonic relationship. Please remember, there is a monotonic relationship between the two. So your error, your variance should be monotonically related to your xis. That is the assumption. Now what you do is, you rank the observation. Suppose you say that you have only one explanatory variable. Now you rank the observation according to the values of xi in an ascending order. So you rank all the observations. Now what you do is, you omit the central certain values. You omit C central observations from your data. So what you are essentially doing is, let me draw it out. What you are essentially doing is, you are assuming that there are these small xis, these are large xis, and you are saying that the variance here is going to be large and the variance here is going to be small. So ultimately, you are saying that there is going to be huge variance difference between this side of the data and that side of the data. So essentially, what you can do is, you can run two different regressions. One regression on smaller values of xi and one regression on larger values of xi, and you can omit these central values. Omit these central values and run two different regressions on two sets of data. So you have divided the data into two sets, eliminated the middle values of xi, and divided the entire data into two different sets. How do you divide it? You divide it, you take C as 3/8 of your, if you have 30 observations, so C is an a priori, again C is a parameter, according to different C's you will get different values. But what you do is, suppose in number of observations, suppose you have 30 observations, so what you do is 3/8 of 30. So if you have 30 observations, you will get somewhere around C as 11. So what you can do is, remove in between the 11 terms and then take data for the first few terms and the last few terms. So in this case, you will have somewhere around 18 values, and 18 values, 9 values will be smaller values, and 9 observations will be larger observations, and in between observations you will drop. This is how you start approaching it. So you can take C as 11 if you are, this is also a rule of thumb, if you have 30 observations, C will be 11. So what you need to do is just 3/8 of the number of observations. If you have 60, that will be equal to 22. So divide the remaining n minus c. So you had 30 observations. So basically you had 30 observations, and your c was 11. You had 19 observations left, and this can be divided into two groups. Suppose 18 you want to take it as 12. So this 18 can be divided into 9 and 9. Now this has made your data into two different parts. Now fit separate regression lines on these observations. So you will run one regression line on the lower values, which will give you RSS1, and you will run one regression line on higher values, which will give you RSS2. So you will get two different residual sum of squares from the two different regressions that you run. And now what you need to do is just have an F ratio between the two. The degree of freedom will be this, and what you need to do is all that has happened is it will be 9 minus the number of parameters that you have. In this case, suppose you have two observations, two parameters, it will be 7. So what you need to do is now you need to compare these two RSS, and if you are assuming that this will monotonously increase, then what you should get is that your RSS2 should be much greater than your RSS1. If that is the case, that means if your F value is extremely huge, that will show that there is considerable difference between this has a very high. If the RSS2 is much higher than RSS1, then this will show that this data actually suffers from heteroscedasticity because of the fact that RSS2 is more than RSS1. So if your F is RSS2 upon RSS1, in case you have the data set where you are saying that the variance is monotonically increasing. But in this case, what you can do when your RSS or your variance is monotonically decreasing, what you can do is, instead of this, RSS1 upon RSS2. This is what you can do. So the difference, this F test, which has a null that there is no heteroscedasticity, which essentially means there is homoscedasticity. This will give you an idea into your heteroscedasticity. So these are the tests that you run. Now for today I'm ending this class because this is quite a bit to capture in one particular class. Now what we need to do is we need to cover how do we actually treat the problem of heteroscedasticity when we face the issue. So for now, I'm signing off. Thank you for attending this. Hi guys, I welcome you all to another session on econometrics. In this session, we'll be continuing our discussion that we were having on heteroscedasticity. On heteroscedasticity, and what we will be covering is the last part of this chapter, whereby we will see the remedial measures of heteroscedasticity. So just to give you a brief of what we were doing, we had started our discussion with the nature of heteroscedasticity and how you can examine that there is heteroscedasticity in the data. Then the consequences of heteroscedasticity was seen on the OLS estimates. We saw that the OLS estimates are still linear and unbiased. Unbiased because of the fact that it's a repeated sampling property. However, they lose the property of minimum variance. So essentially, they are not the best best and with the most efficient kind of estimators. I asked you to prove this thing in your class. So what you can do is you can go through my class notes and see that what is the amount of biasness that is introduced when you have heteroscedasticity in data. I had already written the final conclusion of variance of B2. Then further going on, what we had also analyzed was the detection of heteroscedasticity. Now, as I told you earlier as well, that with the data presented, in case of cross-sectional data, you can pretty much assume as a rule that your data will be suffering from heteroscedasticity. However, when you initially take your data, you will assume it to be as a normal data with the classical linear assumptions. However, at the same point of time, you know a priori that your data might be suffering from heteroscedasticity. So therefore, you would have that confusion how to go about resolving this problem of estimating the regression line. So one of the methods that you can do is you can initially start with plotting your normal regression through the OLS method, assuming homoscedasticity, and then see the kind of behavior that residuals portray. So what you can do is you can map your residuals against each explanatory variable, and if you find a kind of a pattern like pattern B, pattern C, pattern D, or pattern E, you can be assured that there is some extent of heteroscedasticity in the data. And if you have multiple variables, if you have a multiple regression model, then instead of running these error squares against each variable, what you can do is you can directly run these error squares against estimated value of y, because all your xi's, all your explanatory variables are linear combinations forming yi hat. So this is what you can do. This analysis of analyzing the errors is basically called a Resi plot in your statistical models and your statistical softwares. Then another method which kind of converts this graphical method into a normal regression method is the Park test. So what Park test does is it runs a regression of the variance against your explanatory variables, and this is the kind of regression that you will run. However, since you do not have the actual variance, what you have is the errors, these errors. So you run this error, the log of this error square against log of your explanatory variable, whereby your beta 2 will give you the elasticity. So if there is 1% change in your explanatory variable, then is your error changing or is it not changing? So that is the kind of elasticity that you're trying to explain. Your null hypothesis in these cases will be beta 2 is equal to 0, which means there is no relationship between xi's and the error terms. And thereby, if you are able to reject your null, if your beta 2 becomes significant, then you will say that there is some amount of heteroscedasticity in the data. Now, as far as the functional form of this relationship is concerned, the functional form can change, and which essentially is also taken up by the Gleiser test. But here, in this case, the functional form is taken to be as one of the cases. What you can do is you can analyze the errors through the graphical method, and then take an appropriate functional form. So if it's a quadratic kind of a functional, if it's a quadratic function, you can probably take a quadratic functional form or a cubic functional form. The next test is the Gleiser test. Also one of the factors is that instead of running these log ei square, error square, you can run this on yi hat as well, log of yi hat as well. And this encapsulates all the x's in the data, and this is what was given this example. And because the p-value of beta was pretty small, therefore you were able to reject the null hypothesis at 5%, and you were suggesting that there is evidence of heteroscedasticity in the data. Now what Gleiser test does is that the Gleiser test takes, instead of squared values, it takes absolute values, and it runs three different kinds of functional forms with respect to you can take it with each explanatory variable. And in these cases, because it's a very expansive test, you're kind of trying different functional forms and its relationship with the error terms. Therefore, it's a much more stricter test in a sense than other tests that we have in our armory. Then one of the issues with the Gleiser test is that it is taking absolute values, whereas the spirit of variance or the spirit of homoscedasticity or heteroscedasticity is captured by the square term. Therefore, in general, we prefer the Paley test, the White test, or the Bush-Pagan test as to be a preferable measure to detect heteroscedasticity rather than the Gleiser test. Then one of the most famous tests for heteroscedasticity is White's general heteroscedasticity test. What it says is that you will have the normal regression, and on the basis of normal regression, what you can do is you can find the errors and then start regressing each of your explanatory variables, squared form of explanatory variables, the product of explanatory variables, any kind of combination that you want, any kind of functional form that you want on the error square. And your null hypothesis is that all of these parameters are simultaneously equal to 0. Basically saying that you are suggesting that there is homoscedasticity in data. Then White had suggested that whatever R square that you run, that you get from this auxiliary regression, n into that R square will have a chi-square distribution with k minus 1 degrees of freedom. Now here, please remember the k minus 1 is with regards to the auxiliary regression. So in this case, you have 6 parameters and 1 intercept. So thereby removing the intercept, you will have 6 minus 1, 5 degrees of freedom. And again, this chi-square test, your null hypothesis is that you have homoscedasticity, and if you're able to reject your null through this chi-square distribution through checking the tables, then you will say that I have heteroscedastic data. This is exactly what we saw in the example. Observations into R square, and you check the probability of the chi-square at 5 degrees of freedom, and you found out that this is less than 5%. So at 5% level of significance, you will reject your null hypothesis, and you will say that my data suffers from heteroscedasticity. One of the other tests that we had covered was the Goldfeld quant test. In the Goldfeld quant test, what we had assumed was that your data is monotonically related with your error terms. So there is some kind of monotonicity with respect to data, and then what you do is of the n observations that you have, so you have n observations which have been ranked in the magnitude, because your error terms will either be increasing, your variance of error terms will either be increasing or will be decreasing. So let's suppose that this is an increasing case, that with each xi the variance of errors is increasing. It's something similar to the savings example, that higher will be the per capita income or higher is the personal income, higher will be the variation in the savings. So what you essentially do is, suppose you have 30 observations. Basically you're saying that if you have 30 different x's, x1, x2 till x30, and for each, suppose you have one observation, right? So what we do is that we know a priori that we are assuming that your error terms is proportionate to your x's. So what you do is you divide your entire data set into 2 parts. You divide it into 1 part, and this is will be the second part. So your data is divided into n dash and n dash, and the middle term is suppose your c. These are your in between terms. So you drop these c terms, and what you get is n minus 2n, the 2n dash. So this is basically overall, this was your n variables, and you are retaining only n dash and this n dash. So the middle 2n dash are being dropped. And why are they being dropped? Because once you run regression on this data, and then you run your normal regression on this data, what you will find out from here is the RSS1, and from here you will find RSS2. So because of the fact that you're assuming that with increasing x's, what is happening is your variance is increased. So the variance in this data, therefore the sum of square, the residual sum of squares of this part of the data will be much more than the residuals of this part of data. So if you run an F test with RSS2 upon RSS1, And if your RSS2 is significantly more than RSS1, then you will be able to suggest that your regression suffers from, your data suffers from heteroscedasticity. However, if you have a different kind of an example whereby your errors are going to dampen, the variance of errors is going to dampen with increasing x's, then what you can do is you can take the opposite. You can take RSS1 upon RSS2, and you check. This was your Wolfram-Quant test. Now, what we need to see is the heteroscedasticity and its remedial measures. This is the part that we want to cover now. Now, as we have seen that heteroscedasticity does not actually destroy the unbiasedness property. However, what it does is that it gives a huge blow to the the best minimum variance property of the OLS estimators. So what is the solution? The solution is to transform the data. Remember, in multicollinearity as well, I told you that one of the best solutions that you will find is to transform the data. And how do you transform? There are two kinds of cases. The first case is when your variance of error terms is known. However, keep in mind that this will rarely be the case. This will not, in fact, not be the case. But suppose you know the error variance. So in that case, this is your normal regression whereby UI is suffering from heteroscedasticity, which essentially means that along each xi, the variance of UI is changing like this. This is what we mean. Now, what you do is divide the entire equation by sigma. Now, what it does is once you divide the entire equation by sigma, what happens is that this, your new error term, there is an error here, this is Vi, this becomes your new error term. You can write this as Vi. And remember, once you are doing this, your regression is becoming a regression through origin. This is a regression through origin. Let me come back to this a little later. But let's come back to this a little later. But this is your Vi, and this is your transformed error term. Now, this Vi is not going to suffer from heteroscedasticity. Why? Because Vi square is equal to Ui square. There's an error here again. Ui square upon sigma I square. And if you take expectation of this, you will get this value, expectation of Ui square upon summation I square, and the expectation of Ui square in case of heteroscedastic data is this. So once you replace this, the numerator with this, you can cancel it out, you will get 1, which essentially means that now in this transformed regression where you have divided the entire equation with the known variance that you have, you will get constant in the new regression, you will get constant variance, which is ultimately homoscedasticity. And thereby, what you can imagine here, what you can probably see here is, what we have done is, if we know the variance, then what we did was we divided the entire equation. So what we did was we did a weighted least square, where your weights were your summation, sigma I square, which essentially means that you are going to give more emphasis. See, in this regression, try to see, in this regression, what will be the weight given to suppose a particular x100 and you have x5. Suppose at x100 you have huge variation in y's. So because you have huge variation, the variance of this error of 100 will be very huge there, and you are dividing this entire, you are dividing the xi's with the variance. So that means if the variance is huge, what is happening is that the weightage to this particular value is going to be low. Whereas if the variance is small, then the weightage to that particular observation is going to be large. This is exactly what we understood in the initial part of the chapter, that in case of OLS, you will, in case of homoscedasticity, you are taking equal weights to, giving equal weights to all observation. Whereas if your data suffers from heteroscedasticity, you cannot do that. Instead, you should give appropriate weights to each observation depending on the fact that how much of variance is being observed in that particular region. This is called as weighted least square. Now, the second case is when your true variance is not known. Now, this will be the normal case because you will not have the population, and if you don't have the population, that exactly means that you will need to estimate this. So what you can do is you can try to see how are the errors doing the EI square responding to each particular the concerned independent variable. In this case, you can probably see that there is some kind of proportional relationship, proportional or linear relationship. So what you need to do is that you need to map the relationship between the error as well as the independent variable. So if the error term is proportional to xi, that we can see it from this, then what you need to do is you need to have a square root transformation. So essentially what we are saying is that once you have the residuals from the regression, you plot it against the explanatory variable and try to see a pattern. That is why I told you that whenever you have exploratory data analysis, what you need to do is you need to definitely go through the resi plot. See, these are measures whenever you are doing a model, you're doing any kind of modeling, these are steps that you need to take. You will build a normal OLS model, then you will check for multicollinearity, then you will check for heteroscedasticity. If there is a problem in if there is a problem in the data, you need to treat that, then you need to go to autocorrelation. So these are steps of purifying and distilling your data when you start the analysis. So suppose we kind of get this kind of a pattern, so which essentially means that your error terms is proportional to your xi's. So this proportionality, heteroscedastic variance, is proportional or linear related to xi, and what you need to do is check this value. Why we have taken this is that you need to convert your error terms. Your error term has variance of this. Remember, this is a constant into your xi. This is the variance that your data has. Now you need to divide, as we saw earlier. What you need to do is you need to transform the data. You have to transform the data such that the new regression that you get, the new regression line that you get, and the VI that you get out of it should be homoscedastic. That is your aim. Now, how will you convert this into homoscedastic data? What you need to see is that what do you divide it with so that your entire new transformation is a homoscedastic data. So if you see this, what we have done is we have divided the entire data with the under root of xi. Now you would ask that why have you done this? Why have you divided the entire data with the under root of xi? The reason is that if you see the new error term, this is the new error term. When you divide the entire data with under root of xi, whereby under root of xi is nothing but different weights. Now, if you see this and if you square this up, you will get vi square is equal to ui square upon xi. And if again you take the expectation of this, you will get this. This is what you will get. and because xi is again xi is constant and they are already given, so this is essentially what you will get. You will, once you do this, you will get ui square upon xi, and you know the expectation of this is some sigma square xi upon xi. You just cancel it and you will get homoscedasticity. So that is how you transform the data. Remember now, once you have done this, your entire data is a regression through origin. Why is it a regression through origin? Because of the fact there is no intercept term here, because you have divided the entire data in such a way the root square transformation does not leads to a regression through origin model. And this is the kind of what you have done is you have divided your y variable with the same. What you have done is you've divided your y variable with square root of education. Remember what was our initial regression? Your regression was dependent, your wages being dependent on education, and the other factor was experience. That was your regression. Now what you have done is you have divided the entire regression with square root of education. This is your independent variable, your yi upon under root of xi. This is your first variable, this is your second, and this is your third variable, your experience, the x3 divided by under root x2y. This is what has happened. And if you see now, what has happened is these are your coefficients. Remember these coefficients now. Now what you need to do is you can multiply this entire regression equation. You can multiply this entire regression equation with under root of education, and once you do that, you will ultimately get this particular regression. So please try to see that what you have done is your coefficient from this has been converted into this. So all you need to do is now multiply all of these with under root of education, and you will get your normal regression line. So this becomes your beta 1, this becomes your beta 2, and this becomes your beta 3. And this is your normal regression, whereby your under root of education was the deflator. Now the other case, this was case 1 where you were assuming that your error was proportional to was linearly related to your xis. However, the error variance can be proportional to xis. Please remember the difference between the two. Here your error variance is proportional to xi, so you will use square root transformation. And in the second case is that the error variance proportional to xi square. So what you have is, instead of xi in the previous case, you had ui square sigma square xi, and in this case this thing is xi square. And if you find this kind of an analysis, your data is proportional to xi square. Excuse me. So in this case, what you will do is you will divide the entire data with xi. Again, you will say, why have we taken xi? So keep a track that what you need to do is, actually you need to play smart here. What you need to do is just take an under root here. If you take an under root here, you will get to know that what you will divide it with. So the under root of xi square is xi. Therefore, you will divide the entire equation with xi. In the previous case, it was this, and the under root of this is under root of xi. So that is what you will do. And if you see the new vi is ui upon xi, and if you square this up, this is what you will get, xi square, and you take expectation of vi square, you will get expectation of ui square upon xi square, and which is equal to sigma square xi square upon xi square. Again, you find that the new error term is homoscedastic. However, please make a note that what has happened is that initially what was your B1 was your intercept and B2 was your slope coefficient. By dividing by xi, your intercept has become your slope, and your slope has become your intercept. So what you need to do again is multiply the entire equation with xi and you will get the same results. So this is what you get. So what you actually need to do is, remember, this is your coefficient. Please do not make this error. I have seen a lot of students making this error. Whatever is your constant or your this is your ideally your B2 here. This is your B2. What you need to do is just multiply this with xi, and this will become your B1, and this in any case is your B3, and this is your B2. So if you see what is the slope here, it's 0.090. So 0.090 because you have multiplied the entire equation with education. So this is why this becomes your intercept, this becomes your education, this becomes your slope, and this in any case was your slope for experience. Now the third way that you can do is you can re-specify the model in terms of the fact that instead of using a normal regression, you can use linear and variable regression. And what you can do is you can take log linear. You were trying to do a linear regression. What you can do is take log. So what happens when you take log is that if you have very wide variation, the log term actually kind of compresses it, and that helps. That kind of helps in reducing the seriousness of heteroscedasticity. These are all called variance stabilizing transformation. This section is not in your course. And then in 9.6, what you have is you have three different examples. I have already marked these 3 different examples in your class notes. Please go through them and you will be able to understand the kind of transformations that we have. With this, I would like to end the chapter that we were doing on heteroscedasticity. In the next session, what we will be covering autocorrelation. So till then, I thank you very much for attending this session. Bye-bye.